Hello, Chem 1110 students. This is Dr. Dana, and I'm your instructor for this semester, this first semester of the study of chemistry. And we are using the book entitled Chemistry, Atoms First. And the reason or the logic behind that title is that atoms make up everything. And so what we're going to do is study atoms first and how they are put together, and then we'll study how atoms are put together to make molecules, and then how molecules undergo chemical reactions to make new molecules. And that is the real purpose of studying chemistry, is to learn how to make things that people want, products that they would like, or medications that they need, or how to avoid reactions that are detrimental, such as explosions. So we're going to get started here and think about chemistry as the science of change. And so we're looking at this, and we have some examples here of things that are chemistry. It is the study of matter and the changes that matter undergoes. So at the top left, we have methane gas burning, which is what heats your food. We have an old piece of farm equipment here on the right to it that is rusting. That's a chemical reaction. Looks like a couple of Alka-Seltzer tablets reacting in water to produce carbonation. Once again, that's another chemical reaction, as well as cooking and the browning of the cookies, and that's a chemical reaction I think we all love. So in order to study matter, we have to know what matter is. And so matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. Now, the other thing you need to keep in mind is that we talk about the study of chemistry, and scientists follow a very formal set of guidelines to do studies, and that's known as the scientific method. Hopefully this is something you have studied before, and certainly something you can find some videos about. First thing scientists do is they gather data via observation and experiments. Lots of times reactions are observed, and it makes people curious, and therefore they study them. They identify patterns in that collected data and form a hypothesis that, iron, metal, or steel can rust when it's left outside in the rain. That's a hypothesis. And then over time, as more and more experiments are done to prove this hypothesis of theory can be formed. So that scientific method is extremely important, and we will use it throughout the class. Okay, so all scientists are very careful to classify the materials that they are studying. It is a sorting function, and if you've taken biology, you know that various kinds of species are separated by a group and a genus, etc. So in this case, scientists classify matter as either a substance or a mixture of substances. And so a substance is a pure matter. It has a definite composition and distinct properties. So by substance, we're talking about pure materials like salt, iron, water. Now, something like water or salt are made up of two different elements. There's two different kinds of atoms in there. For salt, there's sodium and chlorine. For water, there's hydrogen and oxygen. And this continues. And once we understand more about them, we can say what the chemical structure is. The thing about substances is, since they are pure, they can be identified by looking at the appearance, smell. We don't usually taste things, or other properties such as how they react. Mixtures are a physical combination or two or more of those substances, those pure materials. And there's two kinds. There's a homogeneous mixture, which is another name for it if it's in a liquid solvent, is a solution. And that is the same throughout that sample of liquid. So yeah, apple juice, if you taste the apple juice on the top of a bottle versus on the bottom, they're going to be the same. The other kind of mixture is a heterogeneous. So, of course, these are solutions or mixtures that are not uniform, like a trail mix. My kids always tried to dig the chocolate out of the trail mix. So it's not uniform, as anyone can tell you. Mixtures can be separated by physical means. And you may have done this experiment. On the left, you have a mixture of sand and iron filings. The iron filings will stick to the magnet. And so you separate the iron from the sand, and they're both left purer, and it's no longer part of a mixture. Okay, in classifying matter, we also need to think in terms of states of matter, and we have three examples here of this red material. In the first one, it's a solid and it's sitting as a clump in the flask. In the second one, it's a liquid, and you can see it's filling the bottom of the flask, touching the sides. And in the third one, it's a gas, and it has filled the entire container. And so these are the things that we can use in order to kind of define those states of matter. In a solid, the particles are held very tightly together in a nice ordered fashion, a crystal pattern. And so they're very rigid and they don't fill up that container. But in a liquid, the materials of particles are very close together, but they can actually slide over each other, which is that liquid behavior, and it will fill, or shall I say, take on the shape of that flask. Whereas in a gas, now those particles are moving very quickly, they have a lot of separation from each other, and they're not actually influenced by each other. And so, as I started to mention before, the solid does not conform to the shape of the container. The liquid does, but the gas will conform to both the shape and the volume of the container. So the states of matter are also very important to be aware of. Oh dear. Well, okay. So in talking about properties of matter, there are two types of properties that we need to be aware of. The quantitative properties, and quantitative has a word like quantity in it to help you remember that these are properties of matter that we measure, and they can be expressed by a number. And the other is qualitative, and here we have that beginning of the word quality. So these don't require a measurement, but they're usually based on observation. And so they're going to be things like the color, maybe the smell, that kind of thing. All right, so physical properties can be observed and measured. So they could be qualitative or quantitative. But the key is when you observe them or measurement, you don't change the identity of the substance. An example would be the color or the melting point, that's the temperature at which it melts, or boiling point. They can undergo physical changes, so they could go from one state of matter to another, a solid to a liquid to a gas, but it does not change what the material is. And we have an example here that theoretically, or in principle, all substances can exist as solids, liquids, or gases. We don't always see all of those versions. For instance, mercury is a liquid metal. You never see solid mercury, nor do you see gaseous mercury. But water is a really good example, because here we have a picture of liquid water in the beaker, solid water in the watch glass on the top of the beaker, and because we're adding heat to the water, some of it's being turned into steam, which you see up above. And of course, the ice cubes are melting, producing, going solid to a liquid. So they're changing states of matter, but they are not changing what they are. Another thing we can look at with physical changes are physical separations. And we have 3 examples here. We have extraction when you make coffee. We have a distillation, which will separate 2 liquids. And then we have the last one is called a chromatographic separation. You may have done this experiment even in high school. And it's called thin layer chromatography, where you're separating the different colored inks in an ink, probably a black or a blue pen here, and you can see it's made up of a variety of colors. There's purple, maybe a little red, some blue. And so once again, the mixtures are separated into their components, but there is no change in what those components are. So the other thing we need to know about properties of matter are there are 2 kinds. There's the extensive, which depends on the amount of matter, things like mass and volume. So extensive should make you think of outside. Or intensive properties, so inside of the material. And so those are going to be things like the temperature. It doesn't matter how much there is of it. It's a matter of how much energy it has. Or density. And those are important properties of matter that we will use. Okay, now the other thing that we can look at are chemical properties of matter. And that is defined by how the substance interacts with other things. So there may be a flammability rating in terms of whether it will catch on fire, or corrosiveness. We know some acids can be corrosive to skin or to metals, but an example is just oxygen reacting with iron. When it happens, it's actually corroding that iron because you now have iron oxide. You don't have iron any longer, and it can flake off. So a chemical change is one that results in a change in the composition. You get something new. So for instance, that iron rusting, you get iron oxide, Fe2O3, 2 irons with 3 oxygens. You no longer have pure oxygen. And some other examples here are digestion, which is what happens when we eat our food. It goes from maybe a sugar molecule to energy in your body. Combustion is that flammability, or that's that gas burner on your stove, or oxidation is the rusting of metal. Okay, and we are going to stop there.